Okay, is the sound going? Sound is good. All right, so. Okay, we're starting now. Okay, so now we are going to talk about major glial cell types. And as I mentioned before, glia are also cells of the nervous system that aren't neurons. And I want to point out that this definition only works while we've identified only two kinds of cell types in the nervous system, neurons and glia. If we ever discover more cell types in the nervous system, we're going to have to come up with a better definition for glia. Okay, so here we go. Major glial cell types. Major glial cell types. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is define glia. Okay. So glia is the same as a glial cell. Or, as I said before, they're also often referred to as non-neuronal nervous system cells. So, non-neuronal cells. Okay? And glia have four main functions. All right? So we're going to list those four. Oh. Make sure I use the same convention. Okay. All right, so four main functions of glia. Four main functions of glia. Okay, so four main functions. What are they? So the first one has to do with what we discussed when we were discussing the typical vertebrate myelinated motor neuron. Remember the glial cell we met there, which is the Schwann cell. And the Schwann cell's purpose is to make sure that the electrical signal moving along the axon doesn't leak out of the axon, okay? So this is generally something that glial cells do. They insulate the neurons from each other, okay? So insulate neurons from each other. Okay, so then our second function of the glial cells is they also provide structural support, okay? So function number 2 is to surround the neurons and hold them in place. Surround neurons and hold them in place. Okay? Next, all right, the third function of glial cells. Remember when I made the metaphor about how if the neurons are the rock stars, then the glia are like everything else, making sure that the show can go on? So here's a really, really important function of glia, which is they destroy germs and they remove dead neurons. Very important. Okay? So, destroy germs and remove dead neurons. Okay, then the last one, function number 4. What could it be? Okay, so far we've talked about they make sure that the electrical signal in the nervous system goes where it's supposed to by insulating the neurons from each other. They surround the neurons and hold them in place, so they provide structural support. Then they also provide protection by destroying germs and removing dead neurons so that new neurons can grow in their place. And last but not least is they feed the neurons. They supply oxygen and nutrients to the neurons, okay? Supply oxygen and nutrients to neurons. Okay? So you might already see why I think of the glia as the unsung heroes of the nervous system. And yeah, ooh, not supposed to have favorites, but glial cells are probably my favorite nervous system cells. Okay, so let's go on to the types of glia. So there are two major types that we know of so far, okay? So types of glia. Okay, so the first one is called microglia. Really, really small glia, okay? Microglia. All right, and since this is a new word, I'll underline it in red. Okay, so microglia, these are actually specialized immune system cells that move throughout the nervous system, and they are constantly sampling the environment to see what is needed, whether the cells are healthy, if there's any pain or inflammation anywhere. So they're like the little scientists and doctors that move around the nervous system to make sure everything is good. Okay? So we're going to really quickly define them as specialized, and here's a new word, macrophages. Macrophages. Specialized macrophages that protect central nervous system neurons. Okay, so we have a new word here. New word, macrophage. So let's quickly define that. A macrophage is a type of white blood cell, which is a cell type in your immune system. Okay? Type of white blood cell of the immune system that eats germs, bad stuff. Okay, so have you ever seen videos of like these cells in the nervous system that will hunt down a germ and then they'll just like swallow it up? That's what a macrophage is, okay? Type of white blood cell that eats, quote, bad stuff. Okay? All right. So the second major type of glia is called macroglia, the opposite of micro, so they're bigger, okay? Macroglia. All right. Let's give it a good underline. Okay. So these are going to be most of the glia that I'm going to talk about today that we're going to draw, all right? So far we've learned about Schwann cells. There are also macroglia that, we haven't mentioned any other macroglia yet, but they're also called astrocytes, etc. So we'll go more into this in just a second. And then finally, as I mentioned before, we're just starting to learn about glia, so there's a lot that we don't know about glial cell types. So I'm going to put down here category number 3 as other. We don't know. We might be discovering more. This is a very open and fresh area of research, so it's very exciting, okay? So other. All right. We are still discovering more glia. Okay, very exciting. Nice. All right. So let's start with the macroglia of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, we're going to start there because we already talked about Schwann cells, so we're going to start with something familiar. So here we go. All right. Macroglia of the peripheral nervous system. All right. So the first one, like I said, we've already talked about it. It's our good old Schwann cells. Schwann cells. Let's give it an underline. Okay. All right. So let's recall how we first met the Schwann cells. They were surrounding the axon of our typical vertebrate myelinated motor neuron. And so that's their main function. That's usually what they are doing. They are providing myelin sheaths. Provide myelin sheaths to peripheral nervous system neurons. Okay? The second thing that they do is they also eat germs. All right? And they also clear rubbish, like trash. Any kind of waste that gets generated by the cells, they clear that out in order to help peripheral nervous system neurons regrow. So they're like the janitors, okay? So they clear cellular debris to help peripheral nervous system neurons regrow. Okay, so let's draw once again our Schwann cell. So if I have here my myelinated, what was this called again? The multipolar neurons. Okay, because they have many dendrites, short, small branch dendrites coming off of the cell body, and then this long axon. Okay? And then, as we drew last time, they have myelin sheaths going all the way along the axon. I'm not going to draw all of them this time because our focus is going to be on the Schwann cell, and we are going to zoom in on one of these guys, okay? And then we're going to bring this over here for a zoomed in view of what's going on. All right. So, what is going on here? So, we've got our axon. Okay, so if we are zoomed in, here's our axon. Okay? And then we've got the myelin sheath, which is actually, it's like toilet roll. You know, it's just wrapped around and around and around. And the reason why is because it develops that way because the Schwann cell moves around the axon and it's like pooping out the myelin sheath behind it, okay? All right, so it's going to wrap around and around and around. Until we see that there's an outer layer where the Schwann cell is. So that's the nucleus of the Schwann cell. Okay? And this is the outermost layer that it has been creating. All right? And then behind it is the rest of the axon. Lovely. Okay, so let's label this guy. So we have the axon, we have the myelin sheath, and here we have the Schwann cell. And this is the nucleus of the Schwann cell. Okay? All right, so here's our first macroglia of the peripheral nervous system, our Schwann cell. Excellent. All right, the next glia we're going to talk about is called a satellite cell. All right, satellite cell. Okay, so these are small cells that surround neurons in ganglia. Okay, do you remember what ganglia is? So ganglia is when cell bodies are all in a cluster, and then they can send out their axons like a big bundled cable, okay? So when all these neurons, their cell bodies, are all clustered together, the thing that holds them together and helps them work together as a team, that's what the satellite cell does, okay? So these are small cells that surround, and there are several kinds of ganglia that they can surround, okay? So they surround sensory, sympathetic, that's a new word, parasympathetic, all right, those are the three: sensory, sympathetic, and parasympathetic ganglia. Okay, so let's underline our new words: sympathetic and parasympathetic. All right, so really quickly, I'm going to define, I guess we can also define ganglia while we're here. I'm going to define these additional new words, okay? So sympathetic, too many markers in my hands. All right, so sympathetic ganglia, actually let's use the whole phrase, sympathetic ganglia, okay? So these are clusters of neuron cell bodies that carry information about stress and danger, okay? They usually contain 20,000 to 30,000 cell bodies, and they're located on either side of your spinal cord, okay? That's a lot of cell bodies. All right, so these carry info about stress and danger. Okay, they usually contain 20,000 to 30,000 cell bodies. And they are located either close to, on, or on either side. Located close to / on either side of the spinal cord. Okay, so that's our first new word. Second new word, parasympathetic ganglia. So, parasympathetic ganglia. Okay, so if the sympathetic ganglia are carrying information about stress and danger, what do we think the parasympathetic ganglia carry information about? Okay, so these clusters of neurons, they're really important for a set of processes in your body that occur when your body is resting, and especially after you've eaten. So if the sympathetic ganglia, they are carrying information about, stress and danger and like when you need to be active and when you need to react, the parasympathetic ganglia, they are responsible for all of the things that your body does when you're safe, when you're happy, when you know you can rest. And there are certain processes that your body can only do when you feel safe and when you're resting and when you are well fed, okay? So that's why sleep is important. That's why eating well and regularly is important. It's all very important, not just for nutrition, but also for the functioning of your nervous system, okay? All right, so these ganglia activate what are called rest and digest or feed and breed processes. So activate, quote, rest and digest, or they're also called feed and breed processes. Okay? And these are all activities that occur when the body is at rest, and especially after eating. Okay. And then last but not least, we'll just formally define ganglia once again. And ganglia, as I've been saying, is a cluster of nerve cell bodies. Okay? So this part, the soma, the part with the nucleus, they all cluster together, and that's where the satellite cell comes in. So let's draw this. So we are going to imagine let's use black because I haven't used that in a while. Okay, so we are going to imagine that down here we have a ganglia of pseudo-unipolar cells. So these are the two branches. Remember pseudo-unipolar cells? What do? They have a single neuronal process coming out of the soma, and then it splits. One side goes to the brain and the spinal cord, and the other side goes to the skin, the joints, the muscles. Okay? And so then we have this big old cluster, and this is our ganglia, okay? So on top of that ganglia, you get these flat cells that sit on top of it, and they just cover it, okay? And so then maybe we've got another one here. Okay, and then maybe another one here. All right, so then we'll draw their nucleuses so that you can see that these are the cells, and underneath is the ganglia, the huge cluster of nerve cell bodies. All right. So everything in black is the neuron, and the green that's sitting on top of it, that's the satellite cell. Okay? All right, so let's label this guy. So this is the ganglia. Okay? This is a satellite cell. And this is the nucleus of a satellite cell. All right. So, okay. So you see how the satellite cells here are overlapping? That's because that's how the satellite cells talk to each other. They overlap their cell membranes directly, and then they can pass information directly between the cells. And I'll show you in just a moment what that is all about. So, over here, satellite cells are connected to each other by what are called gap junctions. By gap junctions. Okay, new word. We're going to underline it, and we will define it. And the definition is, so gap junctions are proteins. So they're like, basically anything in a membrane that allows information to pass, that lets ions pass, nutrients pass, oxygen, anything. Holes in the membrane that let things go in and out of the cell, it's almost always going to be proteins. Those holes are created by proteins, okay? So, gap junctions are also proteins that make pores. And pores is another word for a hole or a tunnel. Okay? So they make pores that directly connect the cytoplasm. That's another new word, but hopefully you've heard this one before. Cytoplasm of one cell to another. So real quickly, cytoplasm just means the fluid inside of the cell. So basically everything that's inside of the cell, the stuff that they are floating on, that's called the cytoplasm. Okay, so let's really quickly draw a gap junction. So if we were to take, say, a spot like this, okay, where the cells are overlapping, and if we were to then bring that over here, and we draw a zoomed in version, okay, and actually what we're going to do is, right now we're looking at it flat like this. We're going to rotate it so that we are looking at the one cell is here and the other cell is here, okay? So let me draw that. So we're going to say the green line is one cell, the cell that's on top, okay? So this here is the cytoplasm of satellite cell 1. Okay? Then let's use blue. So then imagine we now have the blue cell. So this is now the cytoplasm of satellite cell 2. Okay? And remember when we diagrammed what the cell membrane looks like when you zoom in up close? So remember, it's a head with tails, head with tails, head with tails, head with tails, and then from the bottom, head with tails, head with tails, head with tails, head with tails, all the way, head with tails, like this. And same deal over here. You've got the head with tails, and then head with tails. Okay? So that's the cell membrane of our satellite cell number 1. Then we have the cell membrane of satellite cell number 2. Okay. And then head with tails. Okay, head with tails. Alright. Okay, and then connecting the two is our gap junction protein. So what color shall we use? Let's use purple. Okay, so like the other proteins that create pores for things to pass through, there are technically 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, making a hole in the middle. But because of the perspective that we are drawing this on, it's just going to look a bit like this, okay? So we've got a protein that goes all the way through both of the cell membranes. And then we also see over here the other proteins. And then the hole is right here in the middle, okay? So there are things that are going to go in through that hole and out the other side, okay? So let's label this as our gap junction protein. All right. Okay, so we have how many more? Oh, that's it. Great. So next we're going to move on to macroglia of the central nervous system, and that will be the next video. Okay. Step aside.